Welcome back to Alberta Prime Time and the Nightly Vocal Point now. Joining our Wednesday crime panel, retired criminologist Keith Spencer. Rod Gregory is an Edmonton-based defense lawyer. And justice and social issues reporter with the Calgary Herald, Jason Van Rassel. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Hi, Michael. Good evening. Canada's Border Services Union warning more drugs, weapons, terrorists will enter the country, and wait times at border crossings will be longer, with the announcement that 1,300 job cuts could be coming across the country. Jason, let's start with you. The federal government's response to the union reaction is fear-mongering. How crucial are border guards to our security?
Oh, incredibly. Everything that they're saying about the kind of stuff, the kind of contraband that can come over the border is true. I mean, just at Alberta's 6 or 7 land crossings alone, we've seen some significant guns and firearm and gun seizures, drug seizures, child pornography, and people who shouldn't be trying to get into Canada. Now, whether the union is actually correct in terms of the impact remains to be seen. You have to remember the United States is now a very, very integral partner with us on border security. And so far, they seem to be saying that they're not all that concerned with what the federal government is doing. And the federal government has also said that when the rubber hits the road, there may only be 250 jobs lost. So we'll have to wait and see on this one, I think.
Keith, Jason just referenced it, but the Harper government pointing to its cooperation now with the Obama administration on a perimeter security deal. Would harmonizing regulations with the states actually enhance security?
Well, I just find it interesting at the very time when Americans are paranoid about Canada's border and who comes and who goes, we're announcing these kind of cuts. So harmonizing, I don't know where that's actually going to end up. I do know that, we've already got competing agencies here. We have CSIS, we have the RCMP, we got the Canadian Border Security people. Somebody called them Walmart greeters. I don't know whether I just sit with that one, but I'm not sure how much out of the totality of stuff that goes back and forth they actually catch. But it is kind of a really interesting philosophical sort of nudge here. I'm just not sure how Americans will actually react when it's done. And I'm not sure how many are actually going to be cut that are actually operating positions at the moment. I think around about 250 is a suggestion.
Rod, you're not sold on the public safety argument, are you?
I'm not sold on the public safety argument. I think what's going to happen is citizens are going to be delayed at the border, and there has to be some type of cohesion between the U.S. and Canada for tourists, because tourists wait in line, and there has to be an emphasis on crime detection. But the Harper government is making these cuts. Harper and Obama are going to South America saying, we're not going to decriminalize drugs and they're evil. People in South America are suffering from murder and violence, not because their citizens are using drugs, it's because our citizens are using drugs. They're suffering. We won't decriminalize it, and now Harper's saying, well, we're making these border cuts. So put these people where they're supposed to be, in intelligence and crime detection, not, and the effect is going to be that we're all going to wait at the border going, taking our shoes off, when people who know how to smuggle drugs are just going to keep doing it. So it's really a hypocrisy.
Speaking of detection and intelligence, and keeping with the Southern Alberta theme, ALERT, that's the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams, they're opening up an organized crime unit in Lethbridge, the 6th such team in the province, and it will reportedly focus on street-level gangs and larger organized crime, both in and outside of Canada. Jason, on one hand, we're talking about potential border cuts. On the other, the province positioning more elite officers in the region. How much of a juxtaposition is this for you?
This makes sense at the provincial level. First of all, ALERT is putting an office in Lethbridge gives them a base in just about every corner, every region of the province. The other thing is Lethbridge is a transit point along a major transportation corridor, Highway 3. It is near the border. The RCMP has a customs and excise unit located in Lethbridge. And, frankly, there is no crime-proof dome over Lethbridge. It's not immune to organized crime or gangs within this province, and so it makes sense to have this kind of enforcement here. Just to give you a small example of that, one of the 4 suspects in the New Year's Day shooting here in Calgary a couple years ago, the triple murder at the restaurant, one of the suspects was nabbed in Lethbridge. So, you know, on a number of different counts, I think this one makes sense.
All right, up next with the Wednesday Crime Panel, a death sentence for the Lifers Transition Program. We're back after the break. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and our Wednesday Vocal Point panel on crime. We discussed federal funding cuts to border security earlier. Now let's talk about the Lifeline program. It helps inmates serving life sentences reintegrate back into Canadian society once they've been paroled, providing resources and peer support from those who have already made the transition successfully. Keith, given your extensive background in corrections, just how important is a program like this?
You mean my life in crime? Well, I can
So
tell
to
you,
speak.
I've got news for the Justice Minister and for the Finance Minister. It costs money to save money. And this kind of a cut is going to be really expensive. In fact, all the program cuts they make for preventing people getting into jail and then not giving them a proper support when they're released, those just cost us a fortune. And that's why we have this revolving door. And I think this decision is foolish. Really, really foolish, and I can hardly sit still when I think of it. But getting people integrated back into the community is a crucial thing. Easy to put people in jail. The government's going to prove that by putting even more people in jail.
Tough on crime agenda.
Don't have programs for them while they're in there. Don't have programs to get them integrated back into the community. We're just going to see those people over and over again. It's really annoying, very frankly, to criminologists and those people who work in the field and know anything. I really regret this.
Rod, how do the needs of the so-called lifers differ from, say, a convicted criminal who spends a lot less time in jail?
Well, they have to be able to be reintegrated into society. They're going to be released. And so they have a huge coping disadvantage compared to other people who are maybe in for 6 months, 4 months. And it's like a completely different world for them when they're released. And the program allowed them to have the tools to get reintegrated into society. It was a hugely successful program. It's even on the Solicitor General's website about how successful the program was. And it also incorporated other former inmates who received specialized training to help the people who are going to be released.
Jason, the annual corrections budget, something in the order, I believe, of $3 billion. This particular program costs about $2 million. Grand scheme of things, worth cutting?
I think what troubles me is that it's part of an overall direction that both Keith and Rod are talking about, you know, the tough on crime thing, while moving away from some of these measures that may be preventative. You know, but I do think, though, that this program itself, we can debate its merits and whether it should have been kept on. The Correctional Service actually studied this program in 2010, and what they found was that most of the inmates who were actually using it tended to be on the highly motivated side and the ones who were self-aware enough to know that they were going to need help on the outside. So you can make a valid argument that the program might have been being used by people who really didn't need as much help as some of the other people who weren't taking the program. So we'll have to wait and see as these things often play out to see whether this is going to have any effect. It did have some value, but whether it's as catastrophic to lose it as Rod and Keith seem to think, we'll have to see, I think.
Well, let's throw a little bit of a curveball question around the table. This particular program grew out of the removal of capital punishment from the criminal code back in 1976. Keith, first up, could this be a signal the death penalty is about to make a return in Canada?
Well, maybe in Alberta. I don't know about the rest of Canada, but I think there has always been a strong, if you did a survey of the general public, those surveys were always a little unnerving for people who are opposed to capital punishment. I don't think there's any kind of a connection, because I don't think anybody thinks that deeply about some of these policy decisions, but it is an interesting thought. In fact, however, murderers are one of our safest group to release. They don't recidivate. They can come back into the community. In fact, you know, your wife has been driving you mad for years. You bump her off. The pressure's gone. You're fine now. And most murders are individual, situational specific. I'm not talking about the gang things, but most of them are, and most of them can be released with relatively good success. So we don't need to hang them. They're going to come out. As Jason said, everybody gets released in Canada. You never throw the key away. So they are coming back out. We don't need to hang anybody.
Rod, we're going to give you a last word on this one.
Well, I don't know how I can follow up with that, but I know that the very, very right-wing governments in the States, when the crime bill came out, said, you guys are doing it wrong. We've learned it doesn't work. If you build a prison, everyone's going to fill it up. And the right-wing states that got rid of their imprisonment policies and went to probation and just incarcerated the dangerous people found that their crime rate actually went down. So I'd be very surprised if capital punishment came back, but I'd be the first to fight it.
Gentlemen, thank you for your thoughts tonight.
You're welcome.
Always entertaining and engaging. Retired criminologist Keith Spencer, defense lawyer Rod Gregory, and justice and social issues reporter with the Calgary Herald, Jason Van Rassel.